Good morning, everyone. So thank you for being here this morning. I was expecting us to be small in attendance this morning, and we're small enough here that I kind of feel awkward being up here while there's just a few of you down there. I feel like we'd be better just sitting in a circle telling some stories here. But just a few things here, as most of you know. We do have a meal prepared for us after we're done here, and all of you are invited to stay and eat. Knowing that there are family that couldn't be here, and even possibly family from Oregon who may be wanting to watch this. We are live streaming this, and so just welcome those that are watching and are going to catch up with us later. Just thank you for checking in and being a part of this. And so what that does mean is I always open up in the middle for a time of sharing. And so I'll do that again here this morning. But if there's anyone who wants to share, you do not have to come up here to share. However, I would encourage it because then that means it's on the microphone, and those who are watching online are able to hear the story as well. It just it helps those. Yeah, I mentioned the meal, I mentioned live streaming, and so with that, let me pray for us. So, Lord, I lift this time up to you. This is something that's a long time coming. Normally we would have been here doing this months ago, but we're here now. And so as we're here now, Lord, I pray your blessing upon this time. This whole family is just one that's always been near and dear to my heart, and I ask just that when we're done here today, we're done sharing, we're done eating together, and we're turning off lights and going home. I pray that we would be able to look back on this time and just say thank you. That we would be able to say that though the wait was long, it was good that we did it. It's just that today is a good day. And I pray this, Jesus, in your name. Amen. Timothy James Shuell. He was born in Milwaukee, Oregon on February 18th. He had two brothers, Tom and Terry, and two sisters, Kelly and Kim. Tim grew up landscaping with his dad, playing football, basketball, baseball. He was actually being scouted for football for college teams, but injuring his knee ended that dream. After graduating from LaSalle, he went into the Marines, where he trained as a sharpshooter or a sniper. He was stationed in a few different places. but Camp Lejeune was the one that I always heard mentioned the most, same with the boys. Um, he served during peacetime, so he was never deployed anywhere. But later in life, he did tell one story that just made him laugh. And there was one particular time where President Carter was there visiting the base, and he was out for his morning exercise. And through the exercise, he fell off of his bicycle. And so the Secret Service rushed to his side and helped get him up and brush him off. And then after they did that, I imagine the way it is in my head, it's one of those, like, after you trip, you look around to see if anybody noticed. And so when they did that, they noticed Tim. And so the Secret Service pulled him aside, sworn him to secrecy, said he wasn't allowed to tell anybody about the president falling off his bike. But it eventually got to the point where it was enough years after Carter's presidency that he felt comfortable and safe telling that story. And every time he did it with a smile on his face. After the Marines, he drove. He drove for a bus for Greyhound. From there, it was on to a warehouse at Super Value, and life eventually brought him here to PA, where he was working for Fry Shipping. When she first met Tim, she couldn't stand him. And she wasn't quiet about this part of the story either, wasn't shy. She couldn't stand him. They were at a party. He was drunk, and he was not a nice man. And so she wanted nothing to do with him, and it'd actually be a few years before she saw him again. In those few years, though, Tim cleaned up. Much of this was due to the influence of Joe and Sandra Gonzalez and Jesus. I'm going to repeat this a couple times throughout this here, but I can't stress enough the difference that Jesus made in Tim's life. Tracy's initial observations of Tim being a drunk and not being a nice man were pretty spot on. And there's actually part of Tim's story that I know about, but I don't know what to do with it. And I don't share it here just because of the types of stories that they are and the sensitive information to them. And I don't tell you that to throw shade on Tim. I tell you that because I want you to know the difference of who he was. And really, I would probably, being a part of Tim's life, I don't think we would be here telling his story. And I don't think Tracy and any of the boys would be a part of the story. So I mentioned the three that were instrumental in Jesus. Those three were also instrumental in getting Tracy and Tim together. So I said already, right? Tracy couldn't stand him. Also, he was significantly older. But they were connected anyway. Tim would ask her, "Do you want to go get coffee?" And Tracy would respond. And I'd imagine it wasn't very polite. It was probably just a little snide in the way that Tracy would respond. He would ask, "Do you want to go get coffee?" And she would respond, "I don't drink coffee." Drink coffee? And he just kept at it. For Tracy, though, it was up to Lady Girl. Lady Girl was her dog. And Lady Girl was an excellent judge of character. When I say she was an excellent judge of character, what I mean is she didn't like men. And so it was up to Lady Girl. And so the first time that Tim met Lady Girl, he walked into Tracy's place and he sat down on the couch. And this dog who has never liked a single man in her life, jumped up on the couch, curled up on her lap, and went to sleep. And Tracy said, "Well, I guess this means this has to turn into something." Yeah. And it did. Tim and Tracy they initially got an apartment together before moving to Country Manor. This is where they were living whenever those of us here at this church, when they came into our lives, that's where they were living. It's where they began to raise their three boys, Christopher, Jonathan, and Nathan. The boys remember their dad being a hard worker. He worked for Goods Tree Service, climbing trees, worked for Pizza Hut, delivering pizzas. There were 3 years of their lives where they remember living off of mac and cheese, hot dogs, and leftover Pizza Hut pizza, which I ate Pizza Hut pizza for a week straight once, and that tore me up. I couldn't imagine 3 years of it. Continuing to work, he did Worked for 8 years on the dock, eventually making his way to driving, where he drove for 10. And looking over his story here, one of the questions that I asked was, well, he drove bus for Greyhound. Why did it take so long for him to be able to drive truck for ABF? And again, it comes back to that life before Jesus. Right? And there were things on his driving record that needed to be, time from them before they would allow him to drive truck. And so again, right, that's the difference that Jesus makes. And Tim was the type of worker that I remember on one particular occasion, they didn't have a running vehicle, or they only had one running vehicle, and Tracy had it, and he still needed to get to work, so he set out and he walked to work. And so that's the type of man that he was, that if he needed to get to work, he got there no matter what it took. In the middle of this, he did scrapping as well. Was the one that spent most of his time with him, as by the time he was doing that, the other two were in school, but Nathan wasn't. So Nathan got to tag along for this. And through the scrapping, he had this extended cab Ford Ranger, and he absolutely loved it. And he worked that thing to death. There was one particular story that they tell. It wasn't scrapping that killed the Ranger, it was landscaping. They had cut down a bush, and someone had the bright idea of using the truck to pull out the stump. And I forget whose idea it was, but through this, they didn't find it necessary to cut any of the roots because it's a Ford Ranger, and it can take it, right? So after a period of tugging and pulling, and tugging, the transmission let go on the Ford Ranger. It was a very sad picture. Any of us that love pickup trucks, we know it. Tim, spirit broken, just sat in the truck as smoke began to pour from underneath the hood, and as it grew, and he sat there silently in the truck, mourning the loss of his best friend. Right? And I get it. My first truck was an S10. After an S10, I drove a Jeep. Now I drive that red pickup truck out there. When I climbed into my red pickup truck, I was like, this is home. This is where I belong. Right? And I know it, right? Because we shared this, right? Because it would be years later until Tim would find another truck. And when he did, he was so proud of it. Right? And I knew that pride, right? And yes, it was another Ford, and it was a piece of junk. The interior panels were all busted out of it, and it was dented, and it was destroyed. And even on one door, it was missing the handle and just had a length of chain that you had to pull to pull the door shut. But he was so proud to have a truck again and to be able to do truck things with his truck again. Just when work camp came around and he had a truck for work camp, the man was all smiles. And the boys, their memories of their dad vary. They do. Tim worked a lot, but when he wasn't at work, he was either at church or he was at home being a dad. Those were his commitments. John shared a story where he was outside playing with his friends and he fell and hit his head really, really hard. He did his best to play it off, and after playing, it was bath time. And they had this thing as boys where after they would get out of the tub, they would run through the house naked. And so as they were sitting there watching TV, Christopher realized it had been some time since he'd seen John naked. And so he said something to his mom. And so his mom went in and he was unconscious in the tub. Like not passed out, but unconscious. He had a really, really bad concussion. And Tim had some EMT training at the point, and Tracy's instinct was not to call 911, but to call Tim. And so when Tim got on the phone, all he heard was, "John won't wake up." And he jumped in his vehicle and flew home, drove home as fast as he could, grabbed John and took him to the hospital. And when they got to the hospital asked him, "Why didn't you call an ambulance?" And Tim said, these are my words, "because I'm faster than the ambulance." And so, right, that's just Tim, that's Tim being a dad. As I said, for Nathan, it was the memories scrapping, and for Chris, it was Dad helping him learn how to walk. Chris was born with some hip and some joint problems, and so after one surgery to help with those things, he had to learn how to walk again. And so Tim helped him. All right, and Tim would help balance him as he walked. And in the peer process of learning your balance, you have to be pushed to that limit and beyond sometimes to learn where balance is and isn't. And so Tim would help push him beyond that moment. And in one moment, Tim pushed just a little too hard, and down he went. But Dad was there to help. Tim was always at their games. Nate played soccer, but he was really excited when John started playing football and basketball because he knew those sports. Didn't know anything about soccer, but he knew basketball and football, and so he could be there for that. They all shared one fond memory, though, of Dad. This is going to be an embarrassing one to Tim, but we're going to tell it anyways. They were all living on Walnut Bottom Road. It was later in the night. It was after supper, but they hadn't cleaned up supper. They usually clean up supper, but this night they hadn't. It was still sitting out on the stove. They were sitting there watching TV when they heard a loud truck pull up outside. Completely never experienced this before, didn't know what it was, but a few seconds after they heard the truck, there was a crash at the front door as this gigantic creature ran through the house and straight into the bathroom. He had to go to the bathroom so bad that he couldn't make it all the way to the terminal, and he was right by the house, and so he had pulled over in front of the house and ran inside the house to go to the bathroom. Big semi and everything parked out along the road. So after he was finally done in the bathroom, he came outside, saw that supper was still sitting on the stove, grabbed a bite to eat, and sat down and watched some TV with his boys before he jumped in the truck and went back to work. I do have a little more that I want to share about Tim. But I want to pause right here at this part of the story and give an opportunity for you guys that are here to share. And so we are small, and so I'm not expecting much, but I am curious if there is anyone here who has a memory or a story about Tim that they want to share I've missed, or maybe something that I got wrong that you feel you need to correct as well. Nathan?
Thank you all for coming. It means a lot. I was like, most of you knew him as Tim Shuell. Others that were fortunate when you saw that he got in trouble knew him as Timothy James, from what my mom would say. But I had the fortunate ability, along with my brothers, to, like Danny said, I got to go junking with him. It took me at the age of 4. I had my own pair of boots and gloves in the little Ford Ranger that he had, and I would go along with him every day. Wasn't in school back then, so that's how he saw the opportunity to get to know me and just be my dad. We'd go tear down trailers, and whatever left over, like toys or anything, I'd bring home, make my brothers jealous, because, that's boys being boys. But, he was very old-fashioned. You didn't really see emotion from him, so you didn't know if he was really human, from what I could observe, but he showed that through his actions. He was very selfless, always gave with 150%, and he always taught us to give it all. If he needed a truck and he didn't have one after his Ford died, he borrowed it. They would give it to him half tank, but he'd always return it with a full tank and not a second thought. He really taught us to give it all and just be 110%, giving anything we could, just because that's who he was as a man. Thank you.
Thank you,
Nathan. As Nate said, thank you for coming. It means a lot to us. Dad worked a lot, like Danny said, and it's what was needed for us because we were a family growing up in a trailer of, 5. So he was there, and then he was there when he came home. And it was nice that he was there. Nate said he didn't really show emotion, and saying that, it was true. I have only ever seen him cry once to put down our dog. One of our dogs, named Ziggy, she had gotten bit by a tick and gave her Lyme disease, and she had paralyzed the back of her legs when she was playing. So, in our decision making, we decided this has ruined her quality of life, so we decided to let her go. And that's the only time I saw Dad cry. It shocked me because I was probably 16, 17, and it's the first time I've seen him be human, and I was shocked because Dad had always been a rock, a pillar. It was the first time he actually showed emotion. It meant a lot because it meant quite a bit. Quite a bit. I miss him quite a bit.
Thank you, Christopher. I'm there with you. There's just, as a boy growing up, your dad's a superhero. And when you realize, right, that they're human, yeah, something happens. And so, any others? Jonathan.
I'm not the greatest public speaking, so this is interesting for me, but it's needed to be said. As Danny said, when I was about 8, I had a severe concussion. That winter beforehand, I had run into our grandma's trailer, who was living next to us, head first, from slipping on the snow trying to play football. That was my first concussion. A couple months later, summer rolls around. I am limited in activities that I can do. Says they don't want me getting another one. We have a friend who was pulling a tug-of-war rope out from underneath my brother's feet. I was to let me try. When I finally did, not only did I convince him to pull it out from under my feet, I convinced all 3 to grab the rope and pull as hard as they could. I go down hard with the wind knocked out of me for good 2 minutes and just lay there. I remember getting up, saying in my head, Dad checks on me. Next thing I know, I'm waking up to a cold bath. With Mom trying to wake me up, and I would say, yeah. That's all she knew. That's all I said. That's when she panicked and called Dad. Dad rushed home, got me to the hospital, and the doctors told my parents, had he not gotten me there as soon as he did, I would not have made it. Growing up, I never had the best relationship with Dad. Always working. When he was home, wasn't always there. Mostly sleeping or hanging out with my other 2 brothers, because they had more physical demanding needs than I did. I always thought my parents didn't care about me for the longest time. Hearing that story, I realized Dad cared about me. He really did. Which is the way I treated him. When I became a teenager, him and I were always at odds. Chris and Nate said he never showed emotion. He showed more emotion with me than he was at me for being a stubborn teenager. But hearing that story from other perspectives, because I didn't remember most of it, just glimpses from my eyes. Dad was there when I needed him. Wasn't always there when I wanted him. Whenever I needed Dad, he was always there. One of the other stories I have was after, not much, but in 2019, he was starting to go mentally with Alzheimer's. And whenever we were trying to take care of him, I wasn't the nicest. Still holding resentment from childhood. Seeing him going from the dad I knew as a kid to that was hard. I never wanted to see my dad go like that. So I always put it on Chris. Whenever I was out there with dad, I was always yelling at him because I was too focused on what I was doing to be focused on what dad needed. Because, as I said, too much resentment towards dad for not being around when I wanted him to be. But he was always there when I needed him. I just hope whenever I'm a dad, I can be as good of a dad as he was to me.
Now, I remember conversations I would have with your mother about you boys. And she would talk about some of those times and some of those fights and those sorts of things. And she'd be all frustrated, feeling like her and Tim weren't doing a good job. And I would always encourage her because I grew up, you guys know, I grew up with 3 brothers and that's just a full house of boys. I always encourage her and say, nope, that's just life with boys. Right? Yeah. As you shared, John, the last few years of your dad's life, filled with much frustration and disappointment. Tim began having trouble at work, ultimately discovered that trouble that he was having were the early symptoms of early onset Alzheimer's. It was heartbreaking watching Tim and Tracy and the boys struggle as different people, different agencies just drug their feet, filing paperwork, losing the paperwork, forgetting to file it. And it really did seem like that when help did come, it came too late. It was heartbreaking the entire way. And it really is a shame watching the way that those things didn't help Tim and Tracy, because Tim and Tracy were people that just wanted to help. Whether it was at the trailer park, right, and their house was the place, their trailer was the place where all of the kids hung out just because they were those type of people, or even Walnut Bottom Road and the various individuals that they brought in just to help. Right, they wanted to help. Tim loved being here, being a part of Bible studies and men's breakfasts and chicken barbecues and work camp. He absolutely loved to help, and as you shared, Nate, the man could work. I remember one work camp, we put him to work, and he came back, and he was just covered in sweat and just like breathing hard because he worked that hard. And I was like, hey, Tim,